Hello and welcome to Comprehension Points Video Snark. This video series isn't an audiobook. If you thought that it was, please stick around and learn some reading and listening comprehension skills. Our books discuss what went wrong and how they can possibly be fixed. I'm continuing my read-through of Cruel Prince by Holly Black. Not the first video, go check out the others. Links are posted below. This chapter contains discussion of violence that might be upsetting for some. Viewer discretion is advised. Chapter 20. They take the carriage over to the party, eating things packed in a picnic basket as they travel. When they're finished with their food, they go wash themselves up with handkerchiefs Oriana packed. However, as a literal child, Oak decides that he has to run to escape being cleaned up, which is impressive considering that they're in a carriage. Like, how big is this thing? Oriana has a little silver leash she attaches to Oak's wrist, which strikes me as not the worst idea, although he whines and sits in the dirt to protest like a cat. While I'm all for child leashes, it seems a bit much. If this is such an event where you feel the need to leash your child, maybe it would have been better to leave him at home. Now their Madoc explains that they will not have to present themselves to the old king. However, when their time comes, they will step forward as a family to present themselves and bend the knee to swear fealty to Dan. So maybe that's why Oak is there, but surely being a child might excuse people from having to do this. Jude goes into the party after her sisters and looks around. There's a lot of pointless character descriptions for characters that I'm not sure are important, other than the fact that the author got her hands on a massive index of common fair folk and wanted to flex her knowledge. At one point, Jude is looking at a group of sulkies and thinks she sees Sophie in among their group, but the girl has really obvious sharp teeth. As Jude moves on, she then looks back and she isn't sure that she didn't imagine the entire thing. Roach approaches her and congratulates her for the murder the other night of the would-be assassin, not Val. He warns her to keep an eye out for anything unusual, since if there's going to be another attempt on Dan's life, it's going to be right before the actual coronation takes place. "Where have you been?" Vivian asked, grabbing hold of me. "You need a leash like Oak's." That was insanely rude, and for no real reason. Jude is allowed to go off and talk to people. The three of them join in the dancing, and then Locke is there. After the number is over, Locke starts to ask a series of puzzling and oddly worded questions about if she would ever love him and what she could do for him. He asks if she would give him up and if she would cry over him. When she questions that last one, she asks a clarifying question on if he would be hurt in this scenario. He says that he would have been on the one to hurt her. However, as you might expect, Jude is kind of the girl who lashed out and hurt somebody in response to bodily harm, so she answers as such. Before Locke can respond to this, Carden randomly butts in, insisting that it's time to change partners. No. This would be the part where you simply leave the dance floor, politeness be damned. If Carden didn't want to be left standing there, he should have been nicer to her. However, if Jude was smart, we wouldn't have much of a story to begin with. The two of them start dancing. Jude gets tired of waiting for the other two to drop with him and orders him to insult her. However, this works in a reverse psychology sort of way, and he insists that he doesn't take orders from mortals. Task failed successfully. Sometime later, they make the announcement that the ceremony is about to begin. Jude goes to find her family, but finds Taryn seeming to flirt with Locke. She thinks about the bizarre conversation that she'd had with Locke earlier, and now it's like casting an awful lot of suspicion onto Locke. If he is Taryn's mysterious boyfriend, why the hell was he messing around with Jude? What a terrible thing to do to somebody. As such, Jude chooses not to go over to where her family is standing. Instead, she watches the ceremony from her spot. King Elred comes out and gives a speech about how he's giving up the throne and the responsibility of it all. People around her cry out, acting as if this is somehow news to them. He then asks that everybody release him from his duties, so that they all shout out that they do. He then drops his cape and hands over his robe. They all ask who will take the throne next, and Elred names Dan, his third son. Dan shows up, disrobes completely, and accepts his position. Then there's this tedious bit where people from a bunch of different courts have to come up and annoy him, while he's still naked, I might add. Imagine if the entire world knew what King Charles's ding-dong looked like. Yikes. As this goes on, Jude's attention wanders to watch the people around the room. She eventually spots Carden standing away from his family and acting like he's three sheets to the wind. Jude can't help but wonder over how he'll be punished for intentionally being apart from his family during such an important historical event. When the anointing is finally over, they do this entire song and dance about redressing him and putting the crown on his head. As she watches, Jude thinks about how her feelings for Dan are. She's grateful to have a place in this court, even if it's from the shadows, as it were. But at the same time, after the way he punished her earlier, she feels little loyalty here to him, that if he were to betray her again, she'd find some way to get back at him. Then Jude makes note that there are suddenly a lot of guards in the room, more than there had been a minute ago. From her vantage point away from her family, she watches as Madoc abruptly sends the others from the room. I think we can all take a guess as to what's going to happen. Up on the stage, they ask that the people accept Dan as their king, which the people say in near unison that they will. A fitting end to the start of the ceremony when they release Elred from his duties. Right then, Belkin steps forward with the sword and challenges his brother, which is kind of a bizarre timing if you ask me. It's like protesting to a marriage after the priest has said, "You may now kiss the bride." Like, it's already over, buddy. Why did you wait so long? Belkin Eldred says sternly, "Child, the high court cannot be like the lower courts. We have no blood inheritance. No duel with your brother will induce me to place a crown upon your unworthy head. Content yourself with my choice. Do not humiliate yourself before all of Fairy." Dan also says that he doesn't view his brother as even worthy of his time, which is 100% the correct response to this level of petty bullying, in my opinion. Belkin randomly murders his sister. Since she was barely a character, I can't exactly comment on if I think that she deserved it or not, but it seems a bit excessive to start killing off your other sibling simply because Daddy didn't pick you to be the king. "Guards," Dan said, in a voice that expects to be obeyed. None of the knights advanced toward the dais, though, as when they turned so that their backs are to the royal family and their swords to the assemblage. They're allowing this to happen, allowing Belkin to stage this coup. "Curse your son, yet inevitable betrayal!" This creates such chaos. Everybody is trying to either get away or get up to the stage area. Jude tries to fight her way up to Dan to try to protect him. However, as she pushes through the people, she watches as Maddox gets up to the stage. For one brief moment, she thinks that Maddox is going to protect Dan, but then Maddox murders Dan right there in front of everybody. Honestly, Jude, I don't know what you expected was going to happen. Even she seems to be mentally kicking herself for how obvious that everything is in hindsight. Now that Dan is dead, Belkin turns to his father and demands the crown. He calls his father weak and old, claiming that Eldred stayed on the throne for too long. Belkin threatens to murder the rest of his siblings and Eldred's consort if Eldred doesn't do as he says, which, wow, buddy, why are you hesitating? You've already murdered 2 of your siblings. Why stop there? "Belkin, firstborn, no matter whose blood you spill, you will never rule Elfheim," Eldred said. "You are unworthy of the crown." The remaining crowd goes wild when the guards murder Eldred's consort, and then Eldred himself. Finally, Belkin turns to his remaining siblings and demands that one of them must step forward and crown him, as we learned about in an earlier chapter. "I will do it," she says. "It is enough. I will make you the High King, although the stain of what you have done will forever taint your rule." Before she can do it, a bolt flies out from the rafters and pierces her through the chest. In the confusion following this, Jude is able to push the crowd and gets to the remaining sister. She holds a knife up to her throat and Belkin begs her not to do it, but she does it because it means that Belkin will never become the king. At this point, there is literally only one sibling left, which is Cardan. Except as previously mentioned, he'd been hanging out away from his family, and for obvious reason. He knew full well what was going to happen today, and as soon as the poo started to hit the fan, he fled. Archers fire up into the rafters where Ghost had made the shot that killed the second sister. He drops down and flees. Jude wants to help him, but knows that it won't do either of them any good. Her, in particular, seeing as how she'd likely be murdered. Frustrated, Belkin turns to some royal attendant. I have no idea who this guy is. Belkin turns to him and demands that he be crowned regardless of the family connection. The dude is like, "I'm not related to you," but Belkin insists, so the crown is retrieved and placed on his head. However, when Belkin demands that the people gathered to swear fealty to him, they all collectively refuse. He might have struck down his helpless family, but I guess they feel safe in defying him now that he's murdered all but one brother. It's also worth noting that the book went out of its way to establish that you can't really become the king unless you have a family member put the crown on your head. "You have 3 days to get it into your head, Kinslayer." Wow, it's almost like murdering your innocent sisters left a bad taste in everybody's mouths or something. Who would have thought? I wonder how much more violence will spring up if there is no new monarch to caution them. I wonder who would welcome it. Around her, the party starts back up again, because there are a lot of people who need the violence in order to thrive, like Maddox. Book 2. This section starts off with another blurry, overly pixelated poem, much like the start of the book had. It is for sure the fault of whoever made this PDF. I wish that they hadn't bothered, since this is pretty unreadable. Chapter 21. Jude hides under the table and tries not to have a panic attack. She thinks about how a few hours earlier he'd handed Jude a family heirloom knife as if it was simply another party. She sees with all of the lies that Maddox had built up around her and about how death is her birthright. Well, one might argue that Maddox is the cause of all the death in her life, that getting away from him would likely lessen the amount of death she is forced to endure, but, only been asking her why she's so desperate to say since the beginning. Anyway, to the surprise of literally nobody, Cardan finds her. He's still drunk as a pig and openly laughs and tells her that she's in danger here. The entire thing is baffling to me, since did he seriously not witness any of what happened? He's acting like he has no idea. Jude randomly decides that she has to help him. No mention of how horrible that he's been to her, or how he recently force-fed her a fairy date rape drug. Nope, it's time to be the better person and help him out. As they go, Cardan starts talking about how much his father hated him. about how Dan is the one who kicked Carden out of the palace. He also makes a passing remark about how untrustworthy that Maddox is, but also comments that it's not like Jude is unaware of how terrible that Maddox is. They crawl from table to table until there are no more tables. Jude wants to simply leave, but Carden reminds her that it's Maddox's men who are standing guard around the area. They will recognize her. Carden is wearing a mask, but if they recognize her, then they'll start paying attention to who she's with. Jude scoffs over the idea that they should know that she never could vote with Carden, but, she doesn't even know who these guards are. There's no way that they'd know about the history between her and Carden, so she goes to steal a mask. As they slip out, some of the guards stop them with the idea that they're simply two idiots looking for a place to hook up outside the main party room. Carden comes to rescue, handing out one of his rings and demanding that some queen trying to send a message to Balkan. It works and gets him outside, which I think is the important part. They walk some distance away from the area before Jude turns around and points her knife against his chin. He seems surprised about this. Chapter 22. Carden is quick to remind Jude that killing him here now will only be one more drop of royal blood spilled that night. He also says that he'd been passed out drunk while Balkan slaughtered the rest of his family. Jude then tells him that she murdered Valerian and buried him near Maddox's estate. However, despite her bravado in commanding Carden at night point, there's something in all of this that tells me that she actually does care. Mainly because if this was simply about keeping Balkan off the throne, she simply would have murdered Carden already. She keeps the knife to his sword and orders him to start walking to follow the directions that she gives him. However, she refuses to tell him where they're going. Jude takes Carden to the Court of Shadows headquarters where she ties him to a chair. Then she looks around to figure out what she could use in the room. After she finishes with that, Carden asks where they are and she tells him. He's actually surprised when he realizes that she was one of Dan's spies. I do something I would never dare to do before I go through Prince Diane's death. It's not like it really matters much right now. He's dead. I'm not sure what I'm looking for. I'm just getting everything as quickly as I can for anything that might give me some idea as to why he was betrayed. It's not so much that I don't think that politics are involved, but mainly I think that she's forgetting one simple fact. Balkan wanted the throne and was going to take it regardless of who his father tried to crown instead of him. She stopped to think about how Maddox had always seemed so loyal to Eldred and Dan, that he hadn't given any indication about hidden loyalties, and that was the way that he'd raised her in turn, which is mainly what surprises her. Jude also thinks about the messenger that she killed under Ghost supervision, that it was a red herring while Maddox and Balkan plotted to do something even more heinous out in the open. She then turns her attention back to Carden and asks if he'd known about Balkan's plot. However, he insists that if he had, he would have run straight to his brother's arms during all of the murdering. Jude randomly starts putting around with one of Carden's rings for what I don't know. Before that can go anywhere, Ghost and Roach show up. They're suspicious of her, seeing as how Maddox betrayed their master. It takes some smooth talking before Jude can convince them that she's on their side. They turn to regard Carden. Then the narration screeches to a halt so that it can describe for an entire paragraph Carden's tale. Why? Why would you write this? Anyway, when the narration remembers itself, Ghost says that they should kill Carden simply so that Balkan could never get what he wants, which I'm totally in favor of if I thought that it could and would help. However, Roach is of the opinion that with their master dead, they should sell Carden to Balkan for the highest price, simply so that they can get away from all this. That also sounds like a valid and totally reasonable option. If you don't care about the bloodshed, that'll be sure to follow with Balkan on the throne. So tell me, Buck, what kind of harebrained scheme is Jude going to propose that'll somehow end up with Carden alive? And why do I get the feeling that no matter what Jude suggests, it's going to end up with her and Carden falling in love? Ugh. However, Carden says that he's willing to tell them anything that they want so long as they don't kill him. He goes on to say that Dan was cunning and had a silver tongue, but Dan had turned Eldred against everybody except for himself. And then goes on to say that Dan had gotten Eldred's consort pregnant and then poisoned her to cover up his crown. Even though it's obvious that Ghost is the one who had poisoned her, finding out that the baby was Dan's surprises everybody. Fairy might be beautiful, but his beauty is like a golden-sized carcass crawling with maggots beneath its hide ready to burst. Sweetie, I don't know what to tell you. I've kind of been saying this from the get-go. Jude returns to the idea of selling Carden to Balkan, that she'd somehow be indebted to Balkan for this, and that he might grant her a spot in his court. However, her fantasies might be nice, but that's the only thing that they are. She's forgetting the fact that she literally watched as Balkan murdered most of his family because he couldn't get his way. Yes, regardless of what Carden might say about Dan, Balkan's display earlier still screams of entitled brat throwing a tantrum. I hope I don't have to say that normal people don't murder their families. Even if Jude were to arrange to sell Carden to Balkan, there's nothing stopping Balkan from simply murdering her to get rid of the threat of blackmail. And the fact that Jude doesn't think about that makes me want to bash my head against the wall. I think of what it will be like to have Balkan for your High King. for the circle of grackles to devour all the other circles of influence. I think of his sniveling servants, of his urging Cardan to kill one of them for training, of the way he ordered Cardan beaten while professing his love for the family. No, I cannot see myself serving Belkin. And, all that too. Diane might have been a solid politician, but at least he knew how to play the game right. He knew how to keep his evil business out of the public eye. Belkin openly screamed to the world how evil that he was. While it might be easy to brush aside stuff about him ordering the murder of his baby mama as baseless rumor, it's hard to deny what Belkin did in front of hundreds of witnesses. At this point, Jude decides to throw Ghost and Roach under the bus for no real reason. She reminds them that Cardan is her prisoner, and she will do with him whatever she pleases. Like, girl, where the hell is this even coming from? You aren't somehow being above all of this while acting like a deranged sociopath. However, Ghost decides to listen to whatever plan that she's going to propose. She sits and thinks about Maddox's decision to back Belkin. She's mainly confused over the entire thing. Here's what doesn't make sense. Why is Maddox backing Belkin? Belkin is cruel and volatile, two qualities not preferable in a monarch. I'd like to remind people that our first introduction to Maddox was of him murdering Jude's parents and kidnapping her and Taran away from the human world. Furthermore, when Jude told us some more about her stepfather, she told us that his species needs spilt blood in order to survive. There's literally nothing about this situation that doesn't seem advantageous to Maddox. He literally needs war, and guess what Belkin has now provided plenty of. Jude then questions Ghost about when and why he'd murdered Locke's mother. Ghost says that it happened 7 years ago because Dan had a premonition about the baby, that if the baby was born, then Dan would never be king. Roach is kind of disgusted by the entire thing. It strikes Jude as odd that they don't seem to know what assignments Dan sent them on. Eventually, Jude decides to put her trust into Roach and Ghost, entrusting them to care for Cardan. Meanwhile, she'll go back home pretending like she got caught up in all of that nonsense. She'll try to poke around and figure out how much that they could possibly ransom Cardan off for. They agreed to this under the condition that if she comes back and they're only to betray them, then they'll kill Cardan and her. And if she tarries for longer than a day, then they'll kill Cardan. Chapter 23. Jude goes back home. There's a lot of knights hanging around this estate, but none of them give Jude a second glance when she comes in. Vivi greets her, obviously panicked with the thought that something might have happened to her sister. Jude insists that she simply got swept up in the crowd. Upstairs, Jude changes her clothes and tries to collect her thoughts. As she stares at the toys and copy of Alice in Wonderland in her room, she ponders her plan to use Cardan to get what she wants out of this awful situation. It seems foolhardy when she's staring into the eyes of a stuffed toy. Jude asks Vivi if she knows why Maddox did this. Vivi is awfully ignorant about the entire thing. And look, I get it. I get that living there is really, truly awful. Now they're living with a man who hunted her down simply to murder his first wife when she tried to escape this. But the truth of the matter is that this is what you have to put up with. Your biological father is a man who goes around and murders and murders and murders. Kings, innocent princesses, his own wife, it doesn't matter much. Which is why that I'm calling Vivi's opinions about why Maddox did this so willingly ignorant. She is shoving her hand in the sand, trying to pretend like she is somehow above all of this. Regardless of if she leaves her or not, that doesn't stop her from being a fairy. She is part of the political situation, whether she wants to be or not, especially when her father is a psychotic king killer. At this point, Jude overhears Taran complaining that Locke doesn't know where Cardan is and that he's been with Maddox for ages. Oriana says that Maddox isn't exactly keen to arrange a marriage. Jude flies into a rage because this is her sister's secret boyfriend who's been mucking around with his girlfriend's identical twin sister for the past several weeks. Obviously, there were some hints, mainly what he said to her right before the coronation was supposed to start, which is like, no shit, Sherlock. She goes downstairs where she challenges her sister to a duel, which I think is totally justified given the circumstances, although I also feel like she's being so much nicer because I think that I might have started off with the stabbing, but that's simply me. So he proposed to you, I say, while the royal family got butchered. That's so romantic. Let's be honest here, the title is Cruel Prince. We all knew that Cardan is going to somehow become endgame, regardless of whatever paths Jude might go on throughout the story. But that doesn't somehow stop the hurt and betrayal from happening with other romantic interests. I get that other guys can be awful towards you, but your own sister? Oh no, that girl gotta die. Jude demands to know what Carden said to Tarn several chapters ago, the time that he spoke to Tarn and made her cry. Apparently, Locke led Narcissa to believe that Jude was the reason why he was dumping her rather than Tarn, so that's why Carden was being extra mean to Jude recently. Jude can't help but think that something Narcissa had said to her earlier. He ruins things. That's what he likes, to ruin things. At the time, Jude had thought that she'd been talking about Carden, but in light of this, she understands now that Narcissa was talking about Locke. At this point, Jude demands that her sister face her in a duel, which again seems like so much nicer than I think Jude should be acting right now. Despite Oriana and Vivi trying to stop them, they get going. Jude airs a lot of her grievances toward her sister. To my immense surprise, Tarn is quick to throw a lot of stuff back into her sister's face, that Jude is deflecting a lot of the pain and hurt that she refuses to acknowledge onto Tarn. And maybe she's right, but holy guacamole on toast, Batman, that doesn't give her permission to have used her sister for Locke's twisted, sick game like that. Vivi then uses her magic to compel her sisters to stop fighting. However, it has no effect on Jude, and she's forced to throw her sword lest she hurt her sister. She's surprised that Dan's Geas is still somehow in effect, even after he was killed. At this point, the servants swoop in to break up the fight further. Maddox and Locke are also there, having been drawn out by the sound of fighting. Jude is completely floored when Maddox chides her, asking if there hadn't been enough killing for one day, as if this monster of a man hadn't committed freaking regicide hours earlier. Maddox makes them go wait for him in the other room for over an hour. Rude. They mostly wait in silence, but Jude breaks it to ask what Maddox had given Tarn from their biological father. She says a set of steak knives. How convenient that Maddox kept a dagger and a set of steak knives, which both suit their personalities. Also, that's kind of tacky to give one daughter a dagger and the other steak knives. Like, can't you want both somehow? When he does come in, he says that he will speak about Locke. Tarn sobs as she asks if Maddox hurt Locke, and Jude can't help but wonder why her sister is putting on an act. He said nothing about a dalliance with Jude then, but when I asked a moment ago, he told me mortal feelings are so volatile that it's impossible to help toying with them a little. Wow, don't be shy, buddy. Tell us how you really feel. I seriously don't know why either of them want to stay there. On one hand, you have murder for political gain. On the other, you have cheating and affairs and murder, simply for the hell of it. I get why he chose her. I just wish she had chosen me. Sisters before misters, and this is why I'm all for Jude murdering her sister. What Locke did was terrible, but what Tarn did is somehow worse. Maddox explains that he finds Locke unacceptable for either of them, but goes on to say that he won't stand in the way of Tarn's happiness, with a huge asterisk after this. I will not even stand in front of the misery that you chose for yourself. Freaking mic drop moment right there, for real. Do people even say that anymore? Whatever, I'm a millennial, I'm classified as old now. He insists that they can't fight with each other anymore and that Tarn's first loyalties are to her family. When Tarn protests over this, Maddox points out that while Jude might have challenged Tarn to the duel, it's not like Tarn forced her to pick up the blade and swing it. He then dismisses Tarn, insisting that now it's Jude's turn. Before she goes, Tarn says that the last time she saw Carden, he'd been dancing with Jude, which I'd like to remind them, even if Jude hadn't helped rescue Carden, that doesn't magically mean that she knows where he is now. That was literally hours ago and one coop ago. Jude and Maddox play a game of verbal chicken. It ends with Maddox insisting that Jude is somehow too young and stupid to fully understand his plans, which he intentionally kept away from her to start with. He goes on to say that if Jude knows where Carden is, he can arrange for a handsome reward from Belkin. He offers up things like romance or revenge. And goes on to say love doesn't grow well thin on pain, and that he doesn't think that Locke is suitable for either of them. I cannot help thinking that Maddox's idea of love doesn't seem like a very safe thing. He loved my mother. He loved Prince Dan. His love for us is likely to afford us no more protection than it afforded either of them. Jude thinks about how carefully that Maddox and Belkin had planned all of this, but the Leslie plans and all that, now the only player left on the board is Carden. She changes the topic and brings up her fight with her sister. He reminds her that she would have regretted killing Tarn, forever clearly thinking about how much he regretted killing his wife. Maddox then says something that Jude can't quite decipher. He's either telling her to kill Locke, or that he knows that she already killed the one guy. Later, Vivi brings Jude some food. She chides her for having tried to murder Tarn, but Jude chides her for using magic to try and compel them to stop. Then Vivi says that she wants for Jude to leave Ferry with her tonight. Jude is randomly surprised by this, but I'm honestly not. Like, how could you not want to leave this absolute dumpster fire of a community on the night when King Trashmouth put himself on the throne via murdering his entire family? Vivi refuses to tell her if Tarn is coming or not. that this is a decision that Jude needs to make for herself, regardless of what Taryn wants to do. She goes on to say that she feels responsible for Jude having remained in Fairy for so long, that maybe Jude does fit in here, but my god, at what cost? That forces Jude to sit and think for a second about what her life could have been like without Maddox having murdered her parents, that she would have simply been another high school girl. She also thinks about what she's become, a girl with blood on her hands. She tried to protect herself from the wolves, but ended up becoming one instead. The wolf thing is a metaphor the book used. But that also makes her think about Rich's offer to sell off Carden and run away to another court. Both options involve her abandoning everything and starting over somewhere new. However, she knows that she can't stay here, where she'll have nothing after this. Vivi will run away to be with Heather, and Taryn will get married to Locke or somebody else. She begs her sister for a day, mainly so that she can settle the situation with Carden either way. Vivi doesn't exactly like the answer, but agrees to give her time. Before Vivi leaves, she tells Jude that things will be different in the human world because they aren't bound by the same BS stuff as the fairies. But that's still forcing Jude back to her problem. She has been forever changed by the decade that she's spent in Fairy, and moving permanently to the human world isn't going to magically fix all that. Thanks for listening to my Book Snark on YouTube. New videos are up every Monday, but stick around because I sometimes drop random videos on other days too. Just as a reminder, even if you can't financially support me, there are other ways to help me out. The first is watching this video as well as all my other videos. It's also important to like and subscribe. Finally, you can share this video with all your friends so that they can help as well. If you're already caught up with all of my videos, you can go to Tumblr for my main Book Snarks, always free and updated every morning. Newly added to Patreon is to become a member without paying. You'll get access to the same thing on Tumblr, but on Patreon. Supporters can have access to so many more books starting at $1 a month. Also new is a 1-week free Patreon trial, so be sure to check that out. Special thanks to Dawn and Phoebe for supporting me on Patreon already. If you want to hear your name in my video next week, either support me on Patreon or make a one-time donation. Do you like my snark so much that you want me to snark your writing? I do that too, but not to worry if you feel like you couldn't take the criticism. I also offer regular book editing as well. You can contact me on any of my social media platforms if you have further questions about my editing services, including pricing options. If you want to read some of the things that I've written, you can purchase my works on Amazon. I have a slew of spicy short stories and 2 full-length novels. I also frequently run flash sales on my stories, and if you don't follow me on any social media, you might want to do so just so you can know when I might be offering things for free. Links for everything will be posted below. I'll see you next week, guys.